Okay, let's talk about the game Hexica here. Just finished a playthrough of it. And did the obligatory tilt this out of my crotch, even though it actually isn't. I tend to think that it is. What do we say about this? Okay, well, first of all, it's sort of an economic game more than anything else. It's sort of this puzzle game, but you're trying to develop your economic structure so that you can, arrange for your attacks. There's a lot of space games that have that sort of nature, but few that are cleaned away and cleared away as much as this. So that's kind of an interesting factor about it. There's this real attempt to keep this simple without being trivial. And I think that's very clear here. Where I'd probably compare it most to, and we'll get to that a little later, is maybe something like Amoeba Wars. Although it's got a very different flavor from that. That's almost the zone that it's in. It's not this broad story the way that Space Empires 4X, Stellar Conquest, even Twilight Imperium to some extent try to be. Maybe even Throne World. It cuts down lower in story than that. It even is less of a story than Amoeba Wars, but it's more of a game in the sense that you're sitting here trying to figure out how can I win in so many different moments. There's so much of it kind of reminds me of Geronimo here with this, or in other cases with normal card games and stuff like that, where you're constantly worrying about how can I get this advantage, how can I trump in Cosmic Encounters, another example that does this, how can I push the win over at this moment. It's towards the end stage of the game, it's always in this state where you don't know who's going to win, and Amoeba Wars has the same thing. Okay, let us move to the components, and then we'll get back to the game and more discussion on issues about that. Because the components, strangely enough in this, are one of the things that I have my biggest complaints about. And I really kind of have them about everything in them. Except the dice. The dice are good. Okay. Yeah, the cards are fine too. Although there is something weird where they have different colors, which is supposed to indicate something about, what kind of card they are, but it has no effect on play. And it just is kind of confusing. It initially had me thinking that everybody should get their own deck and draw from that, but that's not the case. You just shuffle them all together. The play money is kind of cheap. You get kind of the feeling that maybe because most people don't use play money anymore, the hobby's trending more and more towards, not that there weren't cheap play money before, but more and more towards putting it in as a, well, you need it to play, but we know you're not going to actually use it. That's a sad state. I don't think that this game is at all alone in that trend. And even before that, the trend to get away from play money, some games had really cheap play money. 3M kind of comes to mind, although I loved their little 3M for fun for you too. The cubes piss me off. The white cubes are the flags. Yeah. It'd be kind of neat to have actual flags, but okay, whatever, that doesn't have any effect on play. But these colored cubes are damage markers, and they count as numbers. Now, I would much rather have little counters with numbers on them. I don't care if they're chips, I don't care if they're chits. The numbers are arranged in a way that does not make them terribly easy for someone with my mind to remember. So I'm constantly looking them up, and they are not covered, as far as I know, anywhere on any of the plays. Almost the entire rules fit on this, but there's no place to put this particular piece of information. And let me see. Here it is. Here's the one place it is in the rule book, and the page that I was most often at. Blue is 1, green is 2, yellow is 3. Then we go to red 5 and black 10. Now, that's a good distribution. There's no question there. If you're gonna have 5 colors, those seem like decent numbers, but they're not easy to remember. And maybe after a couple of plays, they'd sink in. But I'm not the kind of person who plays a game more than once a year, usually. So every time I play this, it's going to be an irritation to deal with these, and I'll probably just pull out number chits. I wanted to show the game using the cubes to see if they cleared up in one play even. They did not for me. Maybe some people have minds where 1, 2, 3, 5 makes sense to them. I kind of thought it should go 1, 2, 4, 8. That I could have remembered. I still wouldn't be able to remember which color's which, though. And that's kind of a problem with the cubes. Okay. So little play aids are very useful. In fact, this is so useful that it's the only place in the rules, and we'll get to that, where the numbers, where how an attack is handled is actually noted. It's handled by a die roll. If you roll low on a die, you do the lower damage number. If you roll high on a die, you do the higher damage number. That's not spelled out in the rules, but it is in the card. It is also in the video tutorial that the designer provided, or designers provided. There's 2 of them. Little ship counters, okay? They're not bad at all, except for one thing. The 2 fighter types, the F-13s and F-35s, their iconography is too similar for my taste. Yes, they're different, and you do get used to that difference, but you don't scan it as quickly as you do the other images. It's a shame that those could not be a little bit more different in a way that would really kind of call it out to me. Again, as you get used to playing it more, I'm sure it disappears as an issue. The images on them in general are very good. They evoke the feeling nicely. You know, the mothership is this big disc, and the fighters look kind of like fighters, and the bandit kind of looks like those too. And the salvager somewhere in between, and then the harvester is, you know, kind of undefended and looks like it would. That all works for me, and it could certainly be a lot worse. If they threw in a bunch of plastic pieces, I would be much less happy. There's no question. The map is strangely ultra glossy. Now, for a game like this, I don't mind that too much. If it was a war game, I'd be pretty disturbed by it. Avalanche puts out some war games with this kind of gloss on them. What's strange is there's this sort of bubbling going on here. That's kind of a sad thing because it's a pretty map. Other than that, but it doesn't, you know, affect play at all, and the map is functional. Kind of harkens back to the Stellar Conquest map. I kind of wonder, did these guys play Stellar? It doesn't play like the Stellar Conquest map. There, the dust clouds in that are really a navigation hindrance, whereas here, they're an economic boon, the gas clouds in this. But the structure of the map looks similar. It could be either way. It's not that similar. What about the rulebook? The rulebook's an interesting dichotomy. It's very well written, very clear, surprisingly so. Most games don't get anywhere near this nowadays, especially games of this type that are designed for more of a mass appeal. They're filled with color and distractions and tend to be wide format. This is a nice thin format where I can gulp in a paragraph without having to scan across a page this big, right? It works very, very well for me. I'm sure it doesn't for everyone, but there are some examples in here that are helpful. You kind of have to read the whole rules to get the whole thing, because in some places, things you wouldn't ordinarily read, for example, the tips, is where the fact that you cannot move on to Rex is really clearly kind of hinted at. Yes, it's sort of spelled out in the fact that there's no stacking, but that's not always obvious. And maybe some other issues like, I don't remember what, but maybe some issues like that could be called out a little better in the rulebook as well. I'm trying to remember which one it was. Moving over ships. That's a surprising factor. Everything's very fluid. You can fly right through your enemy ships. That maybe needs a little calling out, because that doesn't sink in right away. That's very different from other games. Of course, once you start adding those call-outs and putting those clarifications in, the rules would probably lose some of their cleanness and what makes them so approachable and easy to read. But overall, I think just a couple little tweaks to them would help. The problem is there's these omissions, And that's kind of strange. Usually rulebooks get everything right, but they end up difficult to digest, so I end up cursing myself saying, damn, I'm stupid, I didn't see that, and I feel like an idiot. I would much rather something leave some rolls out that, like with the die rolls here, even if it hadn't been on this chart, that's what I would have guessed. Because quite often rolls are obvious. I'd rather not blame myself, I'd rather blame the designers for leaving something out, and then find out I was right at the end anyway. Okay. That pretty much covers the components well, except for the box, which is a very nice, sturdy little box. The artwork, hey, this looks like a racing game to me. That would have been my first guess. I look at this, I see those flags, I would think it's a racing game. I was kind of confused because Kevin was talking about sending me a racing game, and I said, I just don't really have the time for it. I was afraid this was it. This was something else that I was interested in. And there we go. Okay, what about the gameplay? Getting back to that. Alright. It plays nicely. I'm going to say that much. There are some issues where some extra little, like with the components, some extra little pieces would help. These are things you can throw in yourself. Little markers to indicate, yeah, I moved this ship, yeah, I fired this, because there's no way to really do it easily with the counters. You can't just rotate the counters like you can with square counters on a small hex grid. Hexes on that, it's just not going to work as well, and especially the black on black. There's not enough contrast. It looks pretty when you're playing it, but you really do want some other things. The damn cubes, once things start taking damage, they become confusing. Not just for the numerical issue, but also because the little flags are cubes and the hits are cubes, and it's very easy to kind of assimilate them as the same thing. They're not. One is your goal towards victory, the other one is just an informational marker telling you, hey, I've taken some damage. So, once you kind of clear up those issues, for the most part, I think the game plays very nicely. It sort of strips away everything in terms of storyline and everything. You've got a game where you have a clearly defined goal, these flags, a couple of different routes to get to that. Economically, building up your military seems important so that you can shoot someone out. But then you've got the salvagers, which if you place them in enough places can maybe grab flags and get you into a good position. Danger of grabbing flags? It makes you a target. Because somebody knocks you out of the game, they get all your flags. If they shoot your mothership out, they just get it all. And that's sort of a disincentive to have a lot of flags on your ship. You kind of want to keep them cluttered near your ship, maybe. You can drop them. You can drag them near your ship and drop them off. You don't have to actually capture them. And by doing that, you make things a little bit different in terms of the kind of strategy you'd be playing for. So there are a lot of different little nuances to take into account while you're playing this. Another one is you don't want to shoot up somebody's mothership and leave it in bad shape so that someone else can get the kill. Like with, say, naval war, when you shoot up a ship, if you're not the guy who gets the kill, you get nothing from it. If you get the kill, you get the guy's cards, and you get the guy's flags, which are, of course, the victory condition. So that's, a nice little why you don't just want to pound the crap out of someone else. But there is an issue, and I went over this in the playthrough in probably too much detail, because it's really bothering me, which is that whoever gets the first shot on someone has a huge advantage. If it's right at the beginning of the game, you can wipe out their productive capability, and when they get their turn come around, they're not going to have as much firepower to hit you with. Now, I think in a multiplayer game, that's not a big deal. And I did go over that in the wrap. The reason it's not a big deal is the multiplayer dynamics. There is sort of a feeling in the multiplayer game, though, that the guy who wins may well be the guy who gets the luckiest. What do I mean by that? Well, you start taking shots, and if you're on a roll at somebody's mothership, maybe for the win, if you're on a roll, you get to keep going, and maybe you just win it like that. Not early in the game, but once you get into the end game position. But if you don't make it, you've put some hits on the ship, and now somebody else who wasn't in as good a position might be able to finish things off. And that may be a little disturbing to some people. There is a lot of luck in this game, not just in terms of the die rolls, but the die rolls can be pretty extreme, which is to say, any hit, no matter how powerful, can be completely destroyed by the defender rolling a 1. In general, though, you have a fairly certain amount of damage you're going to do. It's going to be within 1 point, right? You got the 1-3, the 3-5, and the 5-7 for your attack levels. It's going to be within 1 point, and it's a 50-50 chance. Well, it's going to be within 2 points, but within 1 point of the center location of your damage rolls. So you can pretty much figure out what kind of damage you're going to do in a turn, minus the, hey, the defender might roll a 1 aspect. The only exception to that is the wild cards, those bandits. Because they have a 1/3 chance of just capturing anything except a mothership. That's cool because you can go capture cheap stuff that gives you production and strips the enemy's production. That was kind of a neat tactic which the green player did and seemed to be working very well. I thought green had the advantage all game, really. And, even up to the very end until they didn't, It was always kind of a, well, anybody could win this, maybe, but they have the better chance, I thought. And they went first out of everyone, not surprisingly. But people can gang up. They can work against someone who jumps to that kind of, hey, I got the drop on someone and shot them all to crap, and now I've got, the edge on them all game type of position. That won't apply in a 2-player game. And what could apply in the 2-player game? Well, the second player maybe can kind of stay away from the first player. I'd have to play that out and see how well that works. I fear too much that they will be cornered into a less valuable section of space where they will get less cubes available for the win, where they'll get less productive capability. There's a lot of interesting little stuff going on in terms of the maneuver, though. And that's where this game is kind of weird. It works. It's not really to my taste. It becomes sort of this constant puzzle. How do I defend my ship and maybe get the production I want and make the attacks I want? That kind of calculation actually does become fairly interesting. And by interesting, I mean something that I don't terribly enjoy, but I think a lot of gamers would. And I kind of do get a kick out of it when I can really see it. And this is not an annoying kind of calculation. It's sort of a geometrical, graphical one, which is so much better than the numerical calculations that so many games have. So many games, it's the Euros especially, it comes down to, if I can get exactly 7 points here, he can't top that, and I'll be in the... No, I don't enjoy doing that at all, because you're just weighing all these if-thens with numbers. This one becomes more of a... You get used to kind of patterns, and you can structure your defenses that way. It certainly wasn't obvious to me, even after really reading the rules and seeing the designers say, hey, you want to do this, you want to kind of do these defenses, etc. You really kind of have to play around with it to get an idea of what those are, and I like that factor. It means that I want to play it again. Normally, I don't want to play a game again right away. This one, I think I might want to. Not again solitaire, but in an opposed circumstance. I don't think it's a terribly interesting solitaire game. No shock for a lot of viewers, but for, my viewers, usually I do get into things solitaire. This one's not going to capture me that way. But I do think it's kind of a cute little multiplayer game. It's got a lot of that press your luck type situation where you're trying to control your risk, but at some point or another, as you're making shots on a mothership, you have to decide, okay, I'm going to call those off and make other attacks that help me or at least hurt someone else, and don't just hand the game to the next player who gets to go. A lot of that defensive play type aspect in it. Which is kind of funny because I just played Scrabble and Quinto, which are all about that. That kind of plays into this as well. Overall, I have to say, when I read the rules, I walked away kind of with gee, these rules suck. They're clear enough, but they suck because I don't understand what's going on. Like, I don't understand how I get a hit on something, or whether it's just I always do damage. But once I resolved those issues, I kind of had the, gee, is this just going to be too simple? But it's not. It's a simple game that seems to play well enough to provide an interesting game. Again, it's not aiming to give you this great storyline, which is why it's not terribly interesting to me solo. There are a few, very few, of these, of more abstracted games that actually do catch me, and I don't mind playing them solo. This one isn't going to be one of them, but I do think it's going to be kind of fun to play it in a competitive type situation. There's, of course, the question of whether or not you allow open negotiation. I went into that in the playthrough a little bit. I think you'll get a different game based on that. There is some opportunity for silent negotiation. They'll break off an attack or a fight with someone and move to someone else, and then they see you're making this offer. But that's, I don't know, if you've ever played diplomacy, like Gunboat Dip, trying to make an offer like that once you're already in an engagement, that's rough. I don't know how often it'll work. Alright, anyway, overall, kind of pleasantly surprising after those rules, because I think it is a more interesting game than the simplicity led me to believe. It does have its little issues. It definitely has some component issues. I would be, throwing a lot of new pieces into this to replace those cubes, and to add to the player, hey, did I move this ship yet? Did I fire this ship yet? Just little pieces of stuff. There's also the issue of when you capture something and you don't have enough countermix for it, that's the one case where you get extra free bonus countermix or something, and that's not terribly clear how you should handle that in the rules. A lot of little fuzzy areas like that. But overall, I can't say that I'm disappointed in this at all. I think it's kind of fun. Which is kind of cool. Alright, up it goes.